Okay, welcome. Today I'm going to be talking you through where to start with Homer. If you've been following my channel for a little while, you'll know that I read the Iliad in December and the Odyssey in January with the Eclectic Book Club, which is hosted by the lovely Shelley Swearingen and David Wiley. I highly suggest you check them out. But what I wanted to talk to you about today was, I suppose, my experience of it, some little tips and tricks that I can give you if you're thinking about reading them. And this is coming from a person who has no literary background. The last sort of educational read that I did would have been in high school when I did my GCSEs. I read purely for pleasure. I don't have a degree in literature. Literature has nothing to do with my job. I'm just an average Joe person who likes to read. So, with that in mind, how did I approach reading the Iliad and the Odyssey? Well, I suppose let's go back a step and discuss what they are. So, the Iliad and the Odyssey are epic poems. They were written by Homer in about the 8th century BCE, and they were written in ancient Greek, and they were written to be performed. So over the years, many translations have occurred. There may have been some adjustments to the original texts. I think there is some people who say that Homer was actually blind. I am not a historian. I am not that deep into it. I just know that he was a fair way back and he wrote these two very famous epic poems. So let's start with what the Iliad is about. So the Iliad is about the Battle of Troy. So this follows the last year of a 10-year war, which is fought for or over Helen of Troy or Helen of Sparta, depending on your perspective. So Helen of Troy runs off with Paris, who is a Trojan prince, but she is actually married to Agamemnon. No, Gemma. She is married to Menelaus, who is a Greek warlord. So he gets a bit hacked off with that situation, basically gathers like every Greek in Greece and goes out to Ilium and lays siege to the city of Troy, where Helen and Paris live. So in this, we're following a few key characters, a few key heroes. We've got Achilles, Agamemnon and Menelaus, his brother, and Hector, who fights on the Trojan side. Now, this is a pretty slow book. There's a bit of action in the beginning and then a bit of action in the last 4 or 5 books, because this is broken into 24 books. And the rest of it is very much the nitty-gritty of fighting. There is a whole chapter cataloguing the ships that sailed to Troy. And I found this quite dull, really. But this is effectively where this sort of literature comes from. So I really enjoy military fantasies and stories of war and fighting. I really enjoy all of that, but I need a bit more to it than what the Iliad offered, personally, for me. There are obviously gods in this as well. So we have Zeus, who is the head of the gods, and we see quite a lot from the likes of Athena and Aphrodite, Apollo in here, and various other gods sort of sticking their noses in to the fighting. So there are sort of fantasy elements to it in that sense. But yeah, this book comes first, or poem, if you want to call it a poem. This one comes first. Then we have the Odyssey, which follows Odysseus, who is a Greek hero. He features pretty prominently in the Iliad. I'm showing these editions just because I have them both. I didn't read these ones, and I'll go into that in a bit. And this follows Odysseus' journey home. He gets a bit waylaid, shall we say, and it takes him 10 years to return home to his wife, Penelope. So we see some of what happens on his journey back. We also hear sort of through hearsay, I suppose, a few of the things that happened towards the end of the Trojan War, because the place that the Iliad ends isn't actually the sacking of Troy. And then we find out what happens when Odysseus arrives home. This was a lot more enjoyable for me. It was sort of split timeline. So we start sort of towards the end of the period where Odysseus is away and find out what's happened with Penelope and his son Telemachus and what's going on there. And then it sort of skips over to what's happened with Odysseus, and then the two timelines come together at the end. So you can sort of really see how common literature has built from these ideas. And there was a lot more character building. The characters were a lot more 3D in this, particularly Odysseus and Penelope, Telemachus, and Athena, who plays a huge role in this book. The goddess Athena basically orchestrates most of what happens through this. There is also quite a lot from Poseidon and Zeus himself. So yeah, that's sort of the premise of these two books. If they sound interesting, I would recommend that you pick them up. A lot of common retellings are focused on these, and I will talk a bit about retellings and other literature at the end of this video. So if you were looking for some recommendations of where to go after this, or if you don't want to read these but are interested in Greek myth, again, stay to the end and I'll give you some recs. But the main thing when you're picking up these ancient texts is to have a little think about the translation. So I have 3 translations to talk to you about today, and I'm going to focus on the Iliad, though you can usually get the same translator for both the Iliad and the Odyssey in most cases. So you have a choice to make when you first start. Are you going to read the book in verse, how it originally was written, or are you going to read it in prose? I personally found it a lot easier to read in prose, but I did try some other methods. So I just wanted to give you a bit of a flavour really of how different some of these translations can be. So I'm going to read you just a tiny snippet from the 3 translations that I have here today to talk to you about. Starting with this one, which is the Macmillan Library Collection edition, and is translated by Andrew Lang, Walter Leaf and Ernest Myers. So I'll start with book 1. I'll just read the first bit so you can see how they are all different. Sing, goddess, the wrath of Achilles, Peleus' son, the ruinous wrath that brought on the Achaeans woes innumerable, and hurled down into Hades many strong souls of heroes, and gave their bodies to be prey to dogs and all winged fowls. And so the council of Zeus wrought out its accomplishments from the day when the first strife passes Agamemnon, king of men, and noble Achilles. Very pretty, but I have no idea what that was about. So I read, I think I've still got my bookmark in it. Yeah, I read to page 6 of this before I decided that writing style was not going to work for me because I didn't like it. So that was the Lang translation. Next up, I'm going to talk to you about the Robert Fagel's translation, which I very kindly received from Shelley at Shelley Swearingen. I won this in her little giveaway, so thank you, Shelley. Again, I didn't go for this one because I wanted to go for a prose translation first, and this is verse. I may come back to this once I've given it time to digest. Now that I know the story, I would like to try a verse translation in the future, but I need a bit of a break from Homer and epic poems for a bit. So let me read you the first paragraph from this one. Rage, goddess, sing the rage of Peleus' son Achilles, murderous, doomed, that cost the Achaeans countless losses, hurling down to the house of death so many sturdy souls, great fighters' souls, but their bodies carrion, feasts for the dogs and birds, and the will of Zeus was moving towards its end. Begin, muse, when the two first broke and clashed, Agamemnon, lord of men, and brilliant Achilles. So it's blank verse, very pretty, but again, quite hard going, especially if you're trying to follow the story and not just get immersed in the language, in my opinion. And the last one I'm going to talk to you about is the translation that I have on Kindle, which is the Penguin Classics edition. and was originally translated by Rue and then was updated by Rue and Jones for this translation later on, Rue's son. So let me again read you the first paragraph so you can see the difference. Anger. Sing, goddess, the anger of Achilles, son of Peleus, that accursed anger, which brought the Greeks endless suffering and sent the mighty souls of many warriors to Hades, leaving their bodies as carrion for the dogs and a feast for the birds. And Zeus's purpose was fulfilled. It all began when Agamemnon, lord of men, and godlike Achilles quarrelled and parted. So you can see they're all very, very different, and it just depends on your style. I would highly recommend the Penguin translation if, like me, you're not into super flowery writing that you've got to dissect sort of paragraph by paragraph, because I feel like both the Macmillan and the Fagles are that sort of book. So yeah, that's just a little bit on translation. And I just wanted to finish up by talking about some of the books that I am hoping to read having read Homer, and where I sort of want to take my self-education of ancient Greek literature going forwards, and also some modern retellings that I've read that I'd like to recommend that do focus heavily on, or heavily to a degree on these books. So thinking about ancient Greek literature first, the one book that I've been wanting to pick up for a while is Medea by Euripides. So most ancient Greek work is in play format. This is no different. So usually you get Medea and other plays. But the story of Medea is about a woman who kills her children, and she's sort of cast as the personification of the most evil mother or something along those lines. But I think there's more to it than that. There's some sort of like abuse in the relationship between her and her husband and other things going on. So I'd quite like to see what happens there. It's not directly related to either the Iliad or the Odyssey, apart from the fact that it's set in Greek times. Another book that I'd like to pick up along the sort of ancient Greek vein is Aristophanes' Lysistrata. So this came highly recommended from Shelley before I'd even started reading Homer, and this is a comedy, and it broadly follows a group of women who basically protest to a war by refusing to have sex with any of the men. So it sounds really quite funny, especially for the time period that it's set. And Shelley absolutely raved about it when she read it last year. So that's sort of pretty high up my list of ancient Greek texts to get to. The last one is not actually Greek, it's Roman, and that's the Aeniad by Virgil. But this covers the actual sacking of Troy, which doesn't get covered with Homer's The Iliad or the Odyssey. And Aeneas is a Trojan who escapes the sacking of Troy and forms effectively the Roman Empire. So really keen to have a go at that one, but again I will have to look into translations, etc, before I give it a whirl. So moving on now to some modern retellings, there are three that I have read that I would highly recommend, and the first one is very well known, and that is Circe by Madeline Miller. So Circe plays a part in the Odyssey in Odysseus's journey home, and in Madeline Miller's retelling we are following completely Circe. We follow her from childhood up through. Odysseus plays a part in her story, and then we follow her afterwards. So I really enjoyed it. She is cast as a witch effectively, particularly in this book. She's not overly favourably looked upon, and it was a great book to see her perspective, and I'd actually quite like to go back to it now, having read the Odyssey, to see which bits I can piece together. But I really enjoyed it when I read it a few years ago and highly recommend. The next book that I'd like to recommend to you deals specifically with the Iliad, and that is 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes. And 1,000 Ships follows pretty much the same timeline as the Iliad, and maybe a bit into the Odyssey as well, but we are only following the female characters in this story and their journeys. We follow both mortals and goddesses, and it is a fantastic book, really well constructed. It tells the lives of everyone from the lowliest to the highest goddess, and it was fantastic. I said highly recommend last time. Definitely recommend. Put it on your list. And the last one is a pretty new read to me. I read it towards the end of last year, and that was House of Names by Colm Toibin. This is the story of Clytemnestra. Clytemnestra is the wife of Agamemnon, and when he returns home, she murders him. After the Trojan War, he gets and it's her story about how that came about and why she murdered him. And there's quite a lot of backstory that isn't really covered in the original text, and I don't know if it's covered in other Greek literature, ancient Greek literature, but her story was really interesting, and the way that Colm Toibin told it through multiple characters as the book progressed was really, really fantastic. And yeah, I would highly recommend. And the writing is absolutely beautiful in that book also. And so I'm not going to waffle on for any longer, but hopefully there's been some interesting tips and tricks in here. As I said, some people would prefer to read these first, the originals. Some people would like to read retellings first. I think that's personal preference. I found it easier going into these having already got some knowledge of Greek myth from retellings, but each to their own. If you are going to give them a try, please let me know, or if you've read them before, let me know. Also, I'm always looking for Greek retellings because I do prefer them to the ancient. But if you also know some good ancients, then drop those in the comments as well. I just want all the comments, all the comments. If you've liked this video, of course, I would love for you to subscribe and watch more content. Also, hit the like button because it supports my channel. And I will see you soon with another one. Okay, bye.